I'm Dean Walker, and welcome to the Poetry of Predicament Podcast, a podcast for people brave enough to face humanity's challenges and problems, and most importantly, our numerous predicaments. The Poetry of Predicament is a podcast meant to inspire us to bring forth grace, beauty, and connection with the web of life in the face of a predicament-laden world. We're hosting Patrick Farnsworth, who hosts the Last Born in the Wilderness podcast, an exceptional podcast if you haven't heard it. And also, Patrick is a veteran of TEDx talk, so I think this will be an extraordinary conversation. Join us with Patrick Farnsworth. Well, I would like to just start by asking, is there anything that you would like to know about me, to know who is this guy, what's going on, why are we doing this?
Yeah, your name is Dean, and I've been looking at your work, and I'm really fascinated by it. I think a lot of people are coming into this subject from different angles.
Mm-hmm.
So you're coming at it, what I seem to notice is that you're talking a lot about mental health, or, people seem to be pretty anxious and are becoming much more anxious and stressed out about the situation right now. How did you come into that? Come at that from that angle. What brought you to that?
Okay.
Yes, I could ask that question.
Well, I come from a background of more than 20 years in the training business, and that's corporate leadership training, and it's personal development training for couples and intimacy, and it's also community development training. Training adults to work with troubled kids in the US and the UK. So a lot of different kinds of training.
Mm-hmm.
All along that time, I've really been blessed by being able to work with a lot of very powerful traditional teachers, and also some very non-traditional teachers, very powerful, learning from them. And I didn't get to use much of the alternative stuff for a long time, until about, really it was about 10 years ago, I started to get a very strong hit that things were really not going well, and they were going down the tubes pretty quick. But it was about 5 years ago that I really got my eyes opened with some abrupt climate change stuff, and also other collapse of systems stuff. I had met, and there's a huge amount of affinity for one of his writing partners, Carolyn Baker. Do you know her work?
I know of her. Yeah.
I would recommend highly checking out all the work that Carolyn's done. She's, I think, the most prolific writer on who will we be together in the face of a predicament-laden world. She's got it going on. Anyway, Carolyn and I have been, for the past 3 years, co-producing online summits and doing interviews and writing stuff and creating live workshops, kind of looking at what's wanted out there, what's needed out there. And what kept coming around was, this is not an information situation. This is not a situation in which, if people get enough information, they'll of course come around, have a big awakening, and we'll all move forward in a good way. You and I both know that that's just not.
Yeah, no,
that's not what's going on. And so I'm sorry I'm being so long-winded in answering your question, but I thought I'd give you some background and really how the mental health part came about. Is, I'm just speak for myself now, Carolyn has her own take on it, but I don't think it's too far different from my own. In my eyes, we have normalized and actually a psychopathic reality. We literally are insane as a culture. We're ecocidal. And so that's, first I want to acknowledge your TEDx talk, which I just watched this morning, is just beautiful.
Oh, thank you very much.
And that kind of, you were introducing that audience to kind of bumping up against what I call the membrane of resistance to the entire topic, because probably
Mm-hmm.
nobody in that room was really surprised by anything you said.
Yeah.
But having to
Yeah.
sit with other people and confront the fact that this guy is up and on stage, and I have to listen to this, and we have to respond together, and we have to actually agree that we've heard the same things for at least a
Mm-hmm.
few seconds today.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
Yes.
Then, I've done a huge amount of having conversations with people. My first book I put out last year is called The Impossible Conversation. And that's what I've been having with people, because as soon as I vetted this material for my own satisfaction, I realized this is a conversation that people just don't have and won't have.
Mm-hmm.
We won't have this conversation. There'll be people like you and me, and there'll be some number of folks that talk about this and that. And, a few thousand people on the planet might have some insights and some breakthroughs and so on. But what I think we're grappling with is a massive case of not just denial, but really psychopathological normalizing of an insane culture.
Mm-hmm.
So that is the official ending of that long-winded answer.
No, that is a beautiful summary of your work, because I think, again, we're all coming to this in our own way. We all have our own gifts, I think, to provide, our own perspectives and life experience to present this information. You mentioned that TEDx talk, and I think part of it was to, of course, get that information out there and to challenge people to present this information and say, you're all in a room together. Let's talk about the thing that's, I think, is the most obvious problem or the most obvious predicament of our time. We need to not only discuss the data, because obviously that's your entry into it. You get the basic big data points of abrupt climate change and the ecological crisis. That's all there. There's so much of it that it's hard to ignore. But then the second half of that talk, I really wanted to discuss the other part of it, which is now what? It's not enough to just know it. Now, what do we do in the face of this information? And to me, that seems to be the real work. It's enough. It's not enough to just go around and spread, I guess, doom and gloom, which is fun in its own kind of weird way. Maybe not fun isn't the right word, but there's a certain satisfaction I get in sort of informing people of certain subjects. But I've come to another, I guess, level of maturity where I realize that, it's not an easy subject to even approach ever. Like no one has an easy way of grappling with this information. And we must do the best we can to be patient and let people come into this awareness in their own way. And so doing that second half of that talk was really just me saying, there are very serious things we need to discuss. There are very serious truths that we need to acknowledge. And then and this is a bit of a stretch, and it's difficult for me to even know what this would look like. But if we come into an awareness, if there's enough people that are seeing it for what it is, what does that lead to? And what I mean by that is, what kind of radical shifts within the individual self and the collective can we see? I don't have any necessarily hope that we're going to make it through the next century or the next decade even. But if we act as if we don't have a lot of time, and if we act as if, if you had a terminal diagnosis, how would you act? How would you treat those around you? How would you choose to act in your relationships, and how would you choose to love? And would you continue to pursue useless, stupid projects, or continue to work jobs in the service of an economy, of a system that is, perpetuating the problem? Even if it's too late, which it seems that it is, in that space, we can maybe create something really beautiful. And I think that should be the goal. I think if you can prepare people psychologically and emotionally for what's coming and what is currently underway, maybe something could really amazing. It sounds weirdly optimistic in kind of a pessimistic sort of way, but out of the doom that is coming, or the doom that we are experiencing, something really beautiful could come out of that. Because I don't have this. This is actually, I was interviewed by a guy a few weeks ago. I can't remember his name, and I wish I did. I feel bad that I forgot it, but he has a podcast called Parallax Views. And he was asking me some really interesting questions about being a part of, I guess you could call it a community of people that are talking about near-term human extinction. And something that I wanted to point to when he was discussing that is that I noticed that within these communities, there is this really, I don't think it's helpful at all. It's this view that human beings are scum, that we are vile species, and we deserve our extinction.
We're like
We
a virus on the planet.
Yeah, exactly. And that's used over and over again. We're a bacteria that has reached the edge of the petri dish, or that we're the scum of the earth, and we deserve to die because we've used our intelligence and our resources and our cleverness to exploit nature and to separate ourselves from it. And then ultimately it's leading to kind of a karmic retribution, right? Mm-hmm. And I don't think that that's accurate or fair. I think much more that, like you have discussed before we started this, I don't know if it was beginning or whatever it was, but you're discussing how we're part of a psychopathic culture. Cultures inform human behavior, and it informs our views of ourselves. So I think that a lot of times viewing ourselves as this disgusting, vile thing, we're actually kind of feeding into the problem a bit. I think that is, it's kind of like when we talk about the solutions that are being proposed for climate change. They're stemmed in the very problem in which they come from, right? So we're using technologies in really destructive ways, and they want to basically use the same logic and mentality to fix the problem, And I think that that's sort of similar to people's views that do accept that we're facing the near-term extinction of the human species. To have this view that human beings are worthy of our destruction, worthy of extinction, it doesn't seem to serve anybody or anything except some sort of almost narcissistic impulse within our culture. I think doing my podcast has been a way to not only discuss climate change and discuss obviously the very difficult discussion that comes with that, but also to expose myself and to other people to ways of conceiving and understanding the situation in a different light. And that's why I have such I think a really interesting variety of personalities and individuals on my podcast. I try to explore a lot of different subjects on it because I think that climate change is a symptom of a deeper problem. And if we can get at it and if we can really address it, then I think we can maybe come to some sort of, I don't know what it is. I almost want to say a peace within ourselves, some sort of resolution. Like we kind of resolve those unanswered questions about why we are here at this time in this place. Because that's my goal. Is like, I don't know how to fix the problem, and nobody does. So where does that impulse come from to try to fix the problem? Why can't we fix the problem? And why is our culture created this problem in the first place? And so you'll see, like with my podcast, I like to discuss things such as, whiteness, for instance, like white culture. Where does the idea of being white come from? And that is a destructive force. That's a destructive idea. So where does that come from? Or, the roots of settler colonialism. I talked to a guy about primitivism and this sort of impulse to kind of idealize and romanticize primitive cultures. And, anyway, I don't know what my rant is getting to, but my point is just that there's a lot of ways to come at this subject. And I want to bring as many people into the circle as possible because this seems like a really important task at this time. Yeah.
Well, I've got to say that I think you have a real knack for how you wrap up and present everything you're describing. That's clearly a calling, and it's clearly something you have some not just skill at, but also an artistry in. So I'm so glad that you're one of the voices out here. If you don't mind, I'd like to press you just a little bit in the name of that pursuit that you were just talking about. So we're now a couple of layers in from where most people have run away screaming.
Yeah.
You know, where we are, it seems calmer in here to me, and it sounds like it's calmer in here to you too, as you're mapping it out. That's what I call it when I'm doing these interviews and I'm doing the writing that I'm doing, is just doing my best to map out, what is this terrain? How did we get here? What's possible out on the horizon? And perhaps most importantly, what's called for now if I'm truly present? So if I could just turn the tables on you for a moment and ask you, so what is this abrupt climate change, which tends to get the headline these days when these, in the rare times when these conversations occur, what is or are the bigger issues that abrupt climate change is a subset of that you were just describing?
Well, I think that we, again, tying back to what you said before about this being a culture that has somehow normalized sort of psychopathic behavior. I've been really fascinated by where, like, for instance, I live in a place called Idaho. We live in a place that's been colonized. I think that the people that live here are traumatized, and we have some sort of amnesia. We don't remember why we're here. We just assume that this is normal. And I think I was really influenced by the work of Charles Eisenstein. I interviewed him for the first time, which was amazing because he was such an influence on my thinking when I was coming into this work. So actually, that's another really fun thing, is talking to people that were influential in my thinking, and it's just sort of a treat to sort of pick their mind. It's also a little nerve-wracking occasionally, but that's just the territory. But Charles Eisenstein discusses this idea that we live in this this sort of I'm trying to think of how he says it, the story of separation, right? So we're as a species, we're a storytelling species. We tell stories, we have a narrative to understand, and whether that fits within a religious or spiritualist or spiritual perspective, or whether it's a more scientific, materialist, rational perspective, we have stories to give ourselves meaning and understanding within the place that we are in. To sort of and I think a lot of times our stories justify our behavior. So I see, for instance, if you could talk about just Donald Trump, he was elected, people are baffled and confused as to why that happened. What drove him to be, what caused this? This is really strange. And he's such an irrational and erratic human being. And what I've always looked at is he is a symptom of a deeper problem within American culture and American society. And I could probably say that about climate change. I think that climate change and abrupt climate change is a reflection of a deeper trauma or a deeper something. It's like we're a species that doesn't, or at least a culture, I should say, as speaking as an American, we're a culture that doesn't really know how to reflect on where we came from and why we're here. Mm-hmm. And as a result, it's made us very callous and apathetic towards things that really are incredibly important. And especially now, as we have moved into this phase of real crisis, we don't have the language, we don't have the ability, we don't have the politics, we don't have the institutions, we don't have any of the things available to us to adequately even discuss the problem. And where does that come from? I find that to be more almost the one of the most interesting pursuits of doing this project, is trying to get to the root of where this even came from to begin with, which means actually reflecting on things that we just take for granted and we assume to be true. And that to me is I guess, I don't know if that answers anything you asked of me, but I think when we talk about climate change, it's a bit like if you imagine the planet being a living system, which it is, and it's a living being, we're experiencing something like the beginning of a sickness. And this planet's trying to keep everything functioning and running for biological life to continue to thrive and exist. But all of the functions are out of whack. It's like an immune system that doesn't know how to deal with an internal virus or problem. And I think that that's because human beings have stepped away from our right role within the larger systems of this planet. And the stories that we've been telling ourselves, I mean, and this goes all the way back to, I mean, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of years of civilization and the traumas that have come from, even the idea that we had to move into an agricultural model thousands and thousands of years ago, that we didn't live off the land as much as we tried to manipulate and control our environments for our own benefit. That comes from a deep insecurity, and that comes from a deep scarcity that we perceived. And we're still playing out this trauma into the future, and it's created all kinds of other problems as a result of that. So I think to even discuss climate change and discuss, like, why is this happening? Because I think that's a big question that people have, is why is this even happening? Why did we even get to this place? I think exploring like the roots of that trauma, the roots of this system that we are a part of, is really a deep question that, again, it's a part of this territory that people don't even know how to approach. But I guess for me, it's like peeling back the layers. Like, okay, climate change is a problem. Here's the data. Okay, we need to reform our system. Well, what if this is a part of the system? What if this whole system is actually, maybe it didn't include it in its planning, but this whole ecological crisis, it's like it's affording capitalists certain opportunities for profit, which is really hard for people to imagine. The Arctic is breaking up right now, and nations and corporations are discussing, oh, this is great. We can ship our oil and our products through this new channel that's emerged. That is how sick this system is, and this is what it creates for people, right? It creates this sort of opportunistic, psychopathic behavior. Where does that come from? Why are we looking at this as like, oh shit, we need to step back and reflect on what's happening? We are so thoroughly altering our ecosystems and our climate systems. The Arctic is melting and breaking up. What is that calling of us? But instead, we're like thinking about profit motives and how to perpetuate and continue this system into the future, when, I think it's calling something completely different of us. But I think to even get to that realization is to actually to really recognize that we are a traumatized people, and we are perpetuating just like a sort of like an epigenetic trauma that we've passed on from generation to generation. So, yeah. That was just a bunch of rambling thoughts, but I hope that got at something that you were asking. That's how it goes. I remember when I first started doing this podcast, I would throw off people because they would say something and it would trigger this like a thought, and then it would string out. And before I know it, I wasn't even asking a question anymore. I was just rambling on about some weird geopolitical nonsense. And they're like, what are you even asking? I'm like, I don't know. I'm sorry. Let me try to reframe this into a question for you. Yeah. And I think I've gotten better at that over time, but I know I've thrown a few people off because of that. Yeah.
Your rambling is welcome here, and
thank you.
Beautifully appropriate at every turn. Mm-hmm. I'd like to just touch on a couple things you mentioned. The word trauma you brought up a few times, and we just happen to be right in the middle of an online trauma summit, Healing Our Trauma Together in an Insane World, is the most recent online summit that Carolyn and I are producing, having a number of guests, including Derek Jensen, might be a familiar name to you. And
oh yeah, I've interviewed him twice. Yeah.
And we also have a live workshop that we're doing in Ashland, Oregon in the middle of October. And really, I'm bringing it up not just in some little shameless promotion here, but it's also really to mention a couple of the threads that you mentioned, like who will we choose to be and what will be the quality of our presence as we face a predicament-laden world. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of my jargon for where you went. And yeah. I don't know a better place than to do that live. Mm-hmm. In what probably is going to end up being just kind of a sudden community and a short time for people to come together and practice, to be able to then take back those skills, take back those experiences, and hopefully, nurture along some seedlings in their own communities to create their own little not so sudden communities or gatherings. So I appreciate you bringing up those things, and I agree with you there. And I would just like to offer you sort of my shorthand for what you just, that part of the territory you just mapped out for us. I've been there a lot. That was a big part of writing the book called The Impossible Conversation. And really, I just kept asking the simplest question I could at each step to keep myself reined in, because I also tend to follow the path into, oh God. Anyway, the first question is, what got us here? And I kept asking that while I was vetting the material and writing and so on. And the answer always kept coming back in some version or another of that we've disconnected. We've disconnected from the primary sources of meaning in a human life. And the shorthand for that, which is not meant to be comprehensive, but it just somewhere in these words, everything seems to fit somehow, is we've disconnected from our deeper selves, from each other, and from Earth. And thanks to Francis Weller, a wonderful friend and mentor around grief, he has a beautiful way of including soul in the equation. And so I've gone from just having self, others, and earth to self, others, earth, and soul as the primary ways of talking about where and how we disconnected. And with each of those disconnections, there's really a hole in our awareness. If we've disconnected from it, we're no longer perceiving it. We no longer see it. And if we don't see it, it's a blind spot, right?
Yeah.
So a couple things about blind spots. Given the human condition, what tends to gleefully fill in the space of a blind spot in an unconscious human being tends to be shadow. We can, I don't know if that's an interesting topic to go down or not, but the point that I wanted to get to about that blind spot that's there, any place where I disconnect from that kind of primary source, is I'm unable to be fully present. We may think we're present, and certainly I meet a lot of brilliant people, and they are present to what they're present to in a gorgeous way. I don't mean to talk smack about us all across the board, but I haven't met anyone yet who doesn't have a substantial hole in the center where that connection with that primary source of meaning used to be. And I think that's part of the frustration that people like yourself and me, when we go in to do an interview with this thought leader, with this incredible person, and we get to these places like, well, so why is it so crazy? What happened? Even with the brightest and the best, we hit these little pockets or corners like, damn. So I just wanted to kind of share my mapping to compare with your mapping, and it seems like there's plenty of overlap or similarities,
right?
And just to kind of spice up the conversation a little bit.
Well, you sparked a thought in me when you talk about the blind spots. So I had an interview with Stephen Jenkinson. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he's I said this at the end of my interview with him, I think the second. So this is actually really funny. Several months ago, I had an interview with him. And for whatever reason, the audio recording program on my computer, I had this really old, crappy computer that I had for years. And it just stopped. It didn't record it. It didn't record his audio. And I was so that, I don't know if that's ever happened to you, but that feeling of like, that was a really amazing conversation. There was something magical about that. Something about this guy, oh my God. And I go back to look at it and it's not there.
Interestingly enough, I had a very similar thing. I think I've interviewed him 3 times. In the second one, I had almost identical time, only it included video as well, and it was
Oh yeah.
oh Jesus.
It
So I'm
makes you
sorry. Go
feel.
ahead.
No, you're right. No, that feeling, and so you understand. So I felt terrible, and what was even worse is that I had 2 other interviews where the same problem happened after that. So I had this series of bad luck, and I felt terrible. I felt like I felt bad for myself, but I also felt bad for them because they take their time to discuss their work, and I'm there to present it, and it didn't work. So, but with Stephen, I got a chance to interview him again, and he had released his second book on Elderhood. And well, maybe it's not a second book, but the most recent book that he came out with, and A Case for Elderhood in Times of Trouble, I believe is the title. And and in it, he describes how elderhood and being an elder is a cultural function. It's not something that you are just bestowed because you reach a certain age. You're 65 now. You're an elder. Okay. No, it's a cultural function that people recognize in you. You have that function, and you begin to take on the role. You don't choose it; it just sort of happens. And in a healthy, functional culture, we would have elders, and they would be plentiful, and they would help us. They would guide us through these times that we're in. We don't have that for some reason. And actually, he goes over it a bit, and a lot of it has to do with the kind of baby boomer generation post World War II, and he gets into some of the details, but it's actually not as important as you would think, because really the question is, if we don't have elders, can we have them again? And there's something he says, it's a bit like, he described this really interesting story where he was having dinner with a woman, and I think it was her mother, who was Italian, and she's making this amazing Italian food, and somehow the mother said something like, you are hungry because there is food. Something really, it sort of made a weird kind of sense, which is to say that you wouldn't be hungry for something unless you knew it was there. If you don't have it, then you're not going to know that it's missing, right? You're not going to crave a thing that isn't there to begin with. So if we don't have a sense of what elderhood looks like or feels like or is, then we're not going to crave it or desire it or want it. And he says that's the real danger that we are in, and especially as we enter into this predicament-laden times, as you put it. We need people that can center us and bring us into kind of a space of calm almost, or of reflection and understanding and wisdom. And we don't have that really. So we're grasping at straws, and we're trying to maybe frame the solutions within a paradigm that doesn't serve us anymore. And so when you talk about the sort of shadow, something else comes out of our I guess our lack of elderhood in this time. We're just sort of, I don't even know if there's a thing that's replacing it, or that is coming up as a shadow even of that. But maybe it's coming up in all kinds of weird, disparate ways. Like, there's so much unresolved violence almost in our culture, and there's nothing to mediate it. There's no, interestingly, I had an interview with John Zerzan, who's a really interesting character. He's a anarcho-primitivist. Right. He's a fascinating guy, and I don't necessarily agree with everything he's written or said, but something he points to is like, why is our civilization producing, our culture producing such like mass shootings, right? Why do we have young men going into populated areas, assault rifles, and they're just people? You go to any other society around the world, I mean, you go to Canada, or you go to other countries that have guns, they don't have this problem. They're not necessarily having mass shootings on the scale that we're having. What is it particularly about where we are at that is causing this deep pain within young men or people in general, for them to act out in this way? I think that a bit of maybe what you're discussing, where there's a lack of something, and all of these unrequited frustrations, anger, rage is bubbling up in all these places. It's kind of like how the mass media It's funny. Tie this to climate change, how the mass media discusses climate change, which is they disconnect it from the big picture. So, oh, there's been all these crazy heat waves all around the world this year. That's weird. Let's move on to the next story. Or this hurricane over here is massive and we've never seen anything like it before. That's weird. Or, they try to focus on the singular event without fitting it within the broader context of what's happening.
Right.
And I think that's how we can maybe try to approach when we discuss it with people, when we discuss something like the violence in American society, or climate change or whatever issue, trying to figure out a way to use language and learn how to have the discussion, the impossible conversation, as you say it. How do we present this information to more and more people so that we can, because at the very least, I want people to be in a state of like understanding. Because when people are just ultimately perplexed by all the crazy things that are happening right now, I want to give them some context. I want to help them fit it within a bigger picture.
Yeah.
And talking about the shadows that come in is a part of that, I think, as well.
Yeah. So I'd like to make an assertion here that you're well on a track that I think is one of the most important tracks we could be doing. I consider myself very much on this track as well. And that track is to provide us another casualty of our disconnection from our primary sources of meaning, says that my mapping. Another casualty is we lose a sense of a baseline experience in each of those areas. So I no longer have a baseline of experience of what's wholesome or healthy or good inside my own body. I no longer have a baseline experience of what it is to be truly intimate, truly connected with other people. Mm-hmm. And for sure, we don't have a baseline for what is right relationship with the earth. And to me, the greatest exemplar for me of a human being committed to reconnecting or remembering an appropriate baseline with our relationship with the earth is Derek Jensen. Mm. I mean, you've undoubtedly read his stuff, heard him talking, and in your interviews, he's just a fountain of these examples of when the fish were so thick you could walk across them at a creek, and there was, it would take 2 days for a herd of buffalo to go by, like that.
Right.
And we just don't have baselines anymore. And so without a baseline of right relationship with each other, in fact, the disconnection as the only baseline we know, the only normalcy we have, we've normalized that being separate and disconnected is the norm. Mm-hmm. So actually within that, it's astounding we don't have more school shootings and more, and I do predict that will increase. That level of craziness will increase. So I'm just wanting to offer you a little bit of my mapping or jargon or whatever to frame what you're saying so well. Mm-hmm. That, originally you were talking about, so why do we have school shootings? So a young person gets a gun and goes into a school and shoots it up. There's this African proverb, I'm going to massacre it because I couldn't find it while you were talking, but it's something along the lines of a young man who grows up in the village and is not held, is not caressed and held in that, embraced. Embraced is the word in the quote that I'm used to. A young man that's grown up in a village and is not embraced will burn down the village just to feel the warmth.
Yep. Yeah.
And I can't help but look out at the so quote unquote the deplorables, the people who voted in Trump, the people who are so angry and white and so on. And you've been mentioning this word trauma, and you're one of the very few that has made that connection, that we are immersed in trauma so much of the time. I believe that we are a culture that is based on, one of the metrics of success in our culture is how well we traumatize others, especially those below us, mm-hmm. in order to keep the structure in place. But right. Here's me starting off on a track that could go forever. So let me come back and see if any of that sparked what you wanted to say.
The sort of normalization of trauma. The reason why I bring up trauma a lot, I guess, or I talk about it is because, so just recently I had a situation with my, it's a sibling of mine, and she has experienced a great deal of trauma in her life for various reasons. She's in a situation now where she's basically alone most of the time, and she's able to get checks, I guess it is, money so that she can live. But she has been, she's been diagnosed with several different mental health. I think it's funny when we diagnose people because there's so many of them. It's really hard to pin down where the trauma really comes from or where this happens. But that separation can be within yourself too. We're talking about the normalization of disconnection. That's within us as individuals as well, within our own parts of our psyche and who we are and what our real needs are. And if we don't have a baseline of what it means to be a healthy human being, just a side note here. Another thing I like to discuss on my podcast is psychedelics, because I don't know what you're familiar with that at all. And some people don't know why I'm even bringing up that subject a lot on the podcast, is because if you have an experience of wholeness, because I had this experience several times under the influence of various psychedelic compounds where I felt whole. And by whole, I don't mean I was in the state of complete bliss where I was ignoring all of my problems and all of the traumas and difficulties I've had in my life. I felt like I was in a complete state of acceptance of all of that. I felt a combination of love and happiness and joy and bliss with sorrow and sadness and grief. And all of that, it was included in one giant, beautiful, strange to say this, but it was a beautiful thing because everything felt meaningful and connected. And I think in this time of great, distress, psychedelics, if used correctly, it could help. It could be a really valuable tool in the process of healing. But anyway, that's sort of a side note. But my sister, we're sort of speaking about a personal matter here, but she is not in a place right now that is good. And I have several siblings, and one of my sisters lives in the East Coast right now, and she came back and visited this summer. So she hadn't seen my other sister in years, and she saw the change over these years and saw her degrade mentally, physically. And for everybody else in the family, we all see this. We all see this person that we love and we care about degrade. Her quality of life has been going down in certain ways mentally. And she brought up the very obvious thing. She needs something. She needs help. And I almost cried because at a moment of recognition, like it all rushed in, all of this pent up sadness and frustration because there aren't solutions to this problem. The things that she needs is really difficult to find. Community, people that are around her and me and everybody, that we're all in this sort of connected, loving embrace of community. We don't have that. Everybody's off doing their own thing. We all have jobs that are taking us away from each other. We all have financial obligations. We all have our own worlds that we're all kind of cultivating and creating for ourselves. And we're encouraged to do so in our culture, right? Everything is individualized for us. And and so this issue has come up over and over again in my personal life, where I recognize the disconnection that I have within myself, within the feelings that I don't want to address about my own family, or feelings about my one sibling. But that ties into a bigger disconnection that we have as well. because I think people don't want to, I think what's happened is that because we've normalized this disconnection, things have gotten so bad that if you actually come back and try to reconnect, say with, excuse me, if we try to reconnect with, say, the life systems of this planet again, like we try to really live in accordance with what it means to be a part of the bigger picture, that is extremely painful. If we really took in the damage that we have wrought in our lifestyle that we have right now, God, can you imagine the deep well of pain that we would have to delve into to even get to anything that would be close to a healthy existence on this planet again? But that's what this crisis is asking of us. It's like a problem that if we don't address it and we ignore it and we ignore it and we ignore it, which is essentially what I think our civilization is doing, it's all coming to a head, and it's all gonna manifest in some form or another anyway. And this is kind of like what I see in my personal life. I see people that I'm deeply in love with, that I deeply care about, that are suffering tremendously, and I want to ignore it, and I want to pretend that everything is good and fine and peachy, when really it's not, because there doesn't seem to be a really clear solution to any of these problems. And I see this on a collective level, and I see this on the individual level. So many people I know are dealing with serious anxiety, depression, suicidal tendencies and thoughts. They're dealing with all kinds of horrible family traumas that have been passed on from generation to generation. And when you see it, it's really painful. And so I think half of what I do is really just throwing it out there and hoping that there's somebody who has a little piece of the puzzle, because I don't know how to get to the root of the problem. I don't know how to address these traumas.
Patrick, could I just stop you for a moment?
Yeah.
So I'm definitely not trying to say that I've got the answer or even close to an answer, but that's what my body of work is. That's what Carolyn's body of work is.
Mm-hmm.
It's exactly this is the doorway into where our stuff begins.
Right.
And I'd like to just stop for a moment, because in your sharing, there's like an energetic quality in what you just took us through. You just stepped us through a part of your inner world, your experience. And I felt it ripple out palpably in my system. And I would invite us to just pause and be present with each other, just here in this cyber environment. And I just want to thank you. This is the place that people are so terrified of, right here. You've been vulnerable enough to share. You don't have the answers. You're feeling these things that are very uncomfortable. It's very real and very freeing for you to have taken us to that edge. And I thank you for that. Mm-hmm. And we could easily, both of us, keep talking, and I'd like to stop talking now. And if we could just spend maybe 15 to 30 seconds just in that presence.
Do you mind if I say something? So speaking of this, this situation or whatever it is with my sibling, so she and this is personal, of course, but she's been abused and violated by men, right? Throughout her life, she's had very difficult, traumatic experiences with men. And being a young man, I'm the youngest of my family. So growing up and seeing one of my sisters, knowing that she's gone through these really traumatic experiences with men, I attributed the trauma to manhood, to being a man, right? Like something is wrong with men. Something is they're exploitive. All they care about is getting something, like it's sex or domination or something. They're just, there's something vile about being a man. And of course I'm male, and I had never had an identity crisis about being a man, growing up and being what I am now. I don't have that internal crisis or internal question. So of course, coming in being a man, I had to question, well, what kind of I want to be? So much of what my manhood was for a long time was a reaction against that, seeing that men are terrible or wrong, or, I wanted to avoid being, I guess, a man. But then I sort of had various experiences, and for various things have happened, and I've come into this awareness that no, there's nothing wrong with being a man. I came across some various books and works. I don't know if you're familiar with Robert Bly and his book. Oh God, why am I blanking on the name right now? Iron John. Thank you, Iron John. That book is about a fairy tale. It's a very old fairy tale about a young, I guess it's a prince, and kind of connecting with the wild man who's manifested as Iron John. And this whole journey this young man goes on, and Robert Bly uses this story to come into an awareness of what it means to go through an initiation and to become a man, and what does it mean to be? I think oftentimes we have to ask the question, a lot of times this phrase is thrown around, this idea of the sacred femininity. The earth is a mother, and there's a sacred quality of being a mother and being a nurturing feminine spirit and having this quality. But what does it mean to be a man and to embody the sacred role of manhood? And I think that kind of ties into what I said about humanity as a whole. We've had this false, and it's understandable. It's totally understandable. I empathize and sympathize completely with this perspective because I've had it before, which is that humanity is a vile species and we deserve our extinction. But to realize that men and, understanding that manhood, that there's this sort of journey that you have to go through in order to adopt the true right role of being a man and to embody that role in a sacred sense. It's very difficult in our culture because we don't have initiatory rites. I grew up Mormon, and so within the Mormon faith, young men are often very pressured, and they do it oftentimes. But when they're about, I think it's 18 years old now, but when I was in the church, it was 19. Young men go off on a mission to preach the gospel, right? They oftentimes get sent to the most crazy places, like not crazy, but I just mean very removed from their normal experience. So they get sent to South or Central America. They get sent to far off lands where they have to learn new cultures, new languages. They do that for 2 years, and they come back and they're a different person. And everybody in the Mormon community recognizes that they've changed. That is like the modern equivalent of an initiatory rite we would see in indigenous or tribal cultures, right? They have different variations of it, of course. There's different ways in which a young man is initiated into manhood. But we don't have that. And so young men are seeking that in their own sort of kind of convoluted, strange ways. Like the U.S. military serves a function in that regard. Not that I'm in support of the U.S. military, or I've never encouraged anybody to go join the military. But I understand the impulse and the desire to go and join this thing that is bigger than yourself. And you feel like you're doing something, and you're going to come back and your family and your friends are going to recognize that you've changed. And we don't have those functions within our culture anymore. And again, it gets sort of taken up by other institutions which have ulterior motives than the well-being of the young man that we're discussing. And so my recognition in my journey, I guess, of understanding these questions of what does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be a woman? What does it mean to be a person in this time, in this place, shows that we have created a normalcy, that we have created a that we have perpetuated a certain state of insanity. And that by creating alternatives, so this is why I'm so attracted to like your work and the work of so many other people, is that they're pointing to the insanity, but they're not just saying we're insane. They're trying to create a more beautiful world out of that. They're saying, what if we created communities that actually embodied the values that we're discussing here? It may be difficult because oftentimes we're grasping at fragments of things that have been almost completely obliterated in the face of the expansion of empire, the expansion of a sort of capitalist system. But by trying to build something, we may be able to generate alternatives. And if in the state of crisis that we are entering into, people are going to be like, what the hell is happening here? What's going on? Everything that I assumed to be true is not true anymore. And there's going to be new stories that are going to move in to make sense of that. Now, it could go various ways. I mean, we're seeing a rise of sort of white nationalist, kind of fascistic ideologies again. People are like, well, why the hell is this happening? This is so strange. Didn't we learn from World War II that fascism is wrong and blah, blah, blah? It's not about that. This is creating and generating a story that makes sense for people, at least temporarily. And by creating an alternative to that and saying, no, we shouldn't buckle down on all of these assumptions. We need to move in a much more healthy, holistic, connected direction. And it's painful and it's hard and the path isn't going to be easy. And there's a lot of unanswered questions that are going to be there. We have to try because, I mean, if you and I are coming into this awareness and so many other people are coming into this awareness, we need to at least try to build something out of that. We can't just meet the end of our existence in a state of despair and confusion without having tried to build something beautiful out of that. And, I think it's funny because oftentimes what people think that I'm doing is I'm trying to instill some sort of fatalistic doomsday, like we're all screwed. Let's just, I'm not doing that at all. I'm actually saying, yes, we may be screwed in a certain sense, but out of that awareness, let's do something with that. I mean, there's different stages. Like we talk about peeling back the layers of this, it's painful, but I think we need to really take the steps forward to build something better, if that's possible. Yeah.
Patrick, I think we promised each other that we would keep it under an hour this time, but of course, I just so look forward to what I hope can happen is future rounds of our conversations continuing. But I'd like to just pull on that last thread that you're suggesting. So what do we do about this? How do we come together in an extraordinary, new and different way? How do we find a more wholesome expression rather than the shadow-infused expression that seems to be just about everywhere right now? And I'd like to get your thoughts on this because, from your own thoughts, your own conjuring on this topic, and then also if you just take a look back in your interviews with people and share what you will about something I've been grappling with in this work, like what to offer in the next webinar, what to offer in the next live coursework that we offer, what to include in the next book. When I'm speaking into statistically in the USA, it's depending on the study that is quoted, it's somewhere between 2/3 and 3/4 of Americans never talk about what matters most with anyone in their life. Between 2/3 and 3/4 of Americans not talking about matters of great import in their lives. And I'm just wondering, have you got any ideas about how to crack that particular egg, or have you heard any good suggestions in the many interviews?
I think about this a lot, and it actually was part of why I did the TEDx talk, because I thought maybe if I broach the subject, people will want to have a conversation. And it turns out not really, actually. People online want to talk about it, like you and me. Like, because I think the thing is, this is the problem, we're a pretty disparate group of people. You're over here and I'm over there. And thankfully we have the ability to do this, what we're doing now, using the technologies we have to have these conversations. But real human to human conversations and discussions, those are hard, because I remember, like you mentioned at the beginning, with the energy, I guess, of the TEDx talk, the very first thing I say in that talk is, I'm presenting a terminal diagnosis for the human species. I felt everybody in that room, and there's like 100 or so people. This is a small city that I live in. Everybody just went, I felt it. It wasn't so much anything I could see. It was something I just felt. And then I present my thing and I kind of unpack what I'm saying. But people, they didn't even really want to look at me after it. I mean, my family were very proud of me. Like, oh, good job, Patrick. Great. Good job. That was a great talk. But nobody wants to discuss the content of what I talked about. They'll say you did a good job, but let's not actually have the discussion. Yeah. So I'm still grappling with this. I don't know how to do it. And partly what my motivation has been lately is how to engage my community where I'm from. Because I've had this really kind of love-hate relationship with where I live. I live in a pretty rural area. It's growing as far as population, but it's a pretty small city. And people don't have these discussions here. It doesn't seem relevant to them. So doing a podcast like this is really weird for people. Like, you're doing a podcast? What do you talk about? Oh, like abrupt climate change. They're like, I don't know what that means. So what I'm planning on doing, and this hopefully is as much for myself as it is for everybody else, because I'm learning and I want to develop my ability to, as you discussed, present this topic and kind of get into it with people around me. It's in the works. I hope we can get it to work, but I'm planning on doing a live podcast. So I have a local music organizer friend who we have a venue that we can do it in, and the idea is to do 2 live Skype calls or interviews, right? And I'll have like a projector and I could live stream it so people online could watch it and be a part of it. But the first person that I have on it who's agreed to do it is Dar Jamel. I really wanted him because I think he's a great communicator. He has a book coming out too, which is appropriate for the timing. Yeah. And he's an amazing guy. I mean, if you look at his history as a journalist, it's mind blowing what he's done. And now he's discussing besides being a war correspondent, he is now discussing another very difficult topic, which is abrupt climate disruption. And he does a fantastic job doing it. So I'm like, if anybody that I could talk to that can engage and have this conversation, it's him. So the idea was have him, we'll do an interview, I'll blow it up and hopefully advertise as widely as possible. And anybody that's interested in the area can come to it. And the idea then is that after maybe a 40 or 50-minute interview, we could do a Q&A so people could ask questions. And by doing that, it's opening it up. It's not just this passive listening that people do normally with podcasts, which is totally fine. But my goal is how do I get people around me to discuss this topic more and begin that process? Because if time truly is short, which it seems it is, think of all the layers that you have had to peel back to get to where you are at right now. That's several years of contemplation, conversations, discussions with friends and family and people that you care about, interviews that you've conducted with people, books that you've read, research you've done. I mean, this isn't something that is purely based on just the data of abrupt climate change. This is an internal quest that people have to go on. And I understand it's delicate, but I feel almost an impatience or a sense of urgency in this topic.
Yep.
And I feel like we don't have time to mess around. Let's get to it. I don't care if I make people uncomfortable anymore. I mean, I'm not going to bring it up in everyday conversation all the time. I'm not that guy that's going to just harp on it every day. I'm not that guy, but when it's appropriate, let's have the discussion. And I'm going to make it so if anybody wants to come to this thing, they can do it. And it's weird because I look around my community, and if there's any community that I can see around me that's in a state of denial, it's mine. I see it every day, everywhere I go. Just this denialism is everywhere, on so many levels. And I'm at a point in my own personal development where I feel confident enough to stand up and say, this is what's happening right now. And if we don't discuss it, you're going to be scared and confused and worried about what's happening, and you're not going to understand what's happening. And I don't want that for you. I want to do this out of love, but I also want to do it out of just a general sense of like, I don't respect, this sounds really coarse or rude or something, but I don't respect the values that a lot of people have, which is to say that it's based on something false. So I'm not going to act as if it's true, and I'm not going to act as if you deserve to believe whatever you want. Everybody's entitled to their opinion, which is what's thrown around a lot. But I'm like, no, not necessarily. I think people need to be challenged. And if I can delicately and maybe also a bit abruptly, but if I can kind of get in there a little bit and present, if it's even discussed at all, even if people are dismissive of it, like, oh, this weirdo is making this live podcast over here and it's about abrupt climate change. Climate change is a hoax. Yeah. No. Even then, but if somebody's overhearing that and they think, oh, somebody's actually discussing it, it's going to open that up. I'm willing to be, maybe I say this now before it actually happens, but I'm willing to be derided or criticized or insulted for doing what I am doing, because I have recognized that this is what, maybe the right way is not to say what I'm supposed to do, but it's just a deep feeling that I have that this is my place right now. And I need to do this. I would feel so, I guess, regretful if I didn't say anything or do anything, and not to try to live up to my own principles or values. So that's in the works. We'll see what happens. I really hope it works out. Dar Jamel did agree to do it next month on the 28th. So
28th.
Hopefully,
my next question was, when is it, so I can be sure to
we threw around a couple dates, but the date right now is the 28th of October.
I'm going to be traveling on that day. Is there any chance you're going to record the whole thing?
Yep. The idea is like, I'm going to have recording. It's going to be video recorded, obviously audio recorded as well. So if you're not able to, I mean, obviously everybody has their own thing going on. I don't want it to be like, this is one time only you can see this thing. It's going to be like a podcast. It'll be something I'll present like a normal episode that I would for my podcast, because I release episodes every week. So I'm going to present it in that fashion, but it's just going to be a little more dynamic than I normally have for it. Yeah.
So I just want to plant a seed for this whenever it is we get to get back together with each other, because I'm finding myself in this. Remember, I mentioned we're doing a online trauma summit right now, a couple nights a week, all month of September, and what I'm noticing is not just the usual deniers. They aren't part of the audience. So we kind of self-select out of that whole stuff.
Sure.
But what I'm also noticing is that within the collapse aware community, there are tremendous membranes of resistance that are custom fit to the collapse aware people. So we got our own brand. There's not some magical amount of wisdom that somehow infuses into our system once the lights go on. Once we realize we have a more systemic view and we think, wow, we're screwed. Oh man, I get it. Patrick, I get it.
Yeah.
There is no a concomitant infusion of wisdom that has me all of a sudden be able to open up my heart at will and be open in a regular way to the next layer and the next layer, or have me understand that I actually have some inner work to do to kind of catch up with that awareness. What I'm saying long-windedly is that in this trauma summit, we've got a very small number of people who are showing up for the live sessions, which include an hour of Q&A with a special guest each session. Mm-hmm. And then what we've been noticing is the few people that do speak up, there's just a lack of energy. Like, people don't know what they don't know. And so there's this flatness, and it's the rare person who can bring forth a little bit of aliveness, of warm curiosity, of engagement. Mm-hmm. and otherwise, it's literally non-existent. And that's with the crowd that's collapse aware.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I really am looking forward to seeing what you see and learning from what you learn as you do this live version. Because I've been thinking about doing the same thing here in Ashland, where it's a pretty hip environment and should be able to get a few folks in the room. But that's one of the most uncomfortable course leading experiences I've ever had in my life was to do the first prototype of the work that Carolyn and I have come up with, and doing it in Ashland, and the amount of shadow present almost immediately in the room in a weekend workshop was more pungent than my work with gang kids in LA or Chicago or New York.
Wow.
Like it was freaking intense.
Interesting.
So, I guess I'm saying also, I don't know what your neighborhood's like, but just watch for shadow, even with a seemingly pretty complimentary audience.
Mm.
And I cannot wait to learn from what you do and what you experience. And I just so wish you well. It's a great idea.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't know what to expect. I almost have this vision, I guess, or something of some climate change deniers showing up, because there's a lot of those in this community. Again, this is a pretty conservative, called a red state, right? So it's a pretty conservative area. So there's a lot of people that just don't. There's a guy that still sends letters to the editor of the local newspaper that's like, climate change is a big hoax. And they're just a big liberal hoax that's trying to, take away our lifestyle and blah, blah, blah. That's still very present here. And I want to be a little counter to that. I want to present an alternative there. And I mean, there might be that. I don't know what I'm going to see. I don't know what's going to happen. And I don't know. I have no map. I have no understanding of what this will look like. Yep. Because this isn't going to be so much a support group or anything. It's just going to be a way to present information and try to engage the audience, just to get them there, just a little bit. And then I'll have a second interview, which currently I'm not 100% certain how that's going to work out yet. But the second interview is going to be a little bit like a way to maybe lighten the mood a little bit after the first interview, but still challenge people about maybe their assumptions about this situation. So yeah, we'll see how it goes. It's going to be very big. So I hope it works out. Yeah.
Well, Patrick Farnsworth, really a joy to get to know you and to have you tour me around your mapping of our inner world. And thank you for being generous enough to give me a little time to do the same with you. And I so look forward to our future conversations. I'm very encouraged that people of your quality and of your heart are out there creating, giving it your best shot, because that's really all we can do. Mm-hmm. So if you'll hang on, I'm just about to end the recording here. If you hang on just a couple moments after that, but just really thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for watching another episode of the Poetry of Predicament podcast, produced by Dean Walker and the Living Resilience Alliance, www.livingresilience.net. Music today from Michael Hedges, as always, and also Port Blue Into the Sea. You may want to check out our sister podcasts, the New Lifeboat Hour with Carolyn Baker on Podbean and at carolynbaker.net. Also, the Impossible Conversation podcast, another channel on YouTube. Thanks so much for joining us. Join us again later for another episode of the Poetry of Predicament.